say that the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your relationships, and I think this is true. And I also think it's something that I've ignored for a great part of my life. I put a huge emphasis on my own health. I put a huge emphasis on my own learning and growth, on my business. And for many, many years, I really neglected personal relationships to my own detriment. And if you look at the trajectory of most people living in a modern world, it's very similar to mine. After the age of 40, most people have something like one friend, and most people have severed or pretty distant relationships with their immediate family, and maybe even adversarial relationships with their immediate family or their in-laws. And this is not how humans are designed to live. We're social beings. If you look at historically how humans developed and how societies were formed, you know, I was up at Loch Ness a couple years ago, and I remember there's this castle right on Loch Ness, and something crazy, like 1,500 people smashed into this tiny castle, the castle grounds, you know, and it just made me realize that there's still so much space up there. There's just an abundance of land. Why would all these people cram in there? Well, that's where the food was. That's where the kitchen was. That's where the leather maker was. That's where the woodworker was. That's where the people were. And we're social beings. We're meant to live that way. But somehow now in our society, as people achieve a certain amount of material success, they tend to isolate. They build fences around their homes. They move further and further apart. They spend less and less time in community. They distance themselves from their relatives. And none of this is healthy, and it's nothing that I have a solution to, but I've been exploring this and thinking about this and trying to fix this in my own life. I'd like to have a good quality life. And in exploring this, I've uncovered that there's a lot of personalities out there, and there's a lot of behaviors that all of us have that are totally destructive and negative, one of which is narcissism. On this week's show, we'll talk about narcissism specifically. It will for sure ring true with someone you have worked for, been in a relationship with, or maybe even someone you're related to. And hopefully this will be a sober look at what your prospects are for the future. As always, your questions, comments, and feedback are most welcome. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the show. So hello and welcome to the Lucas Rockwood Show. Today's show is called Narcissist Survival Guide, and I am joined here with Dr. Ramani Durvasula. Dr. Ramani is a licensed clinical psychologist. She has a private practice in Santa Monica and in Sherman Oaks in California. She's a professor of psychology at Cal State Los Angeles, where she was named Outstanding Professor in 2012. She's also the visiting professor at the University of Johannesburg. She's the author of 2 books, one of which we'll be chatting about today. The books are titled Should I Stay or Should I Go? Surviving a Relationship with a Narcissist. And the second book, You Are Why You Eat. Change Your Food Attitude, Change Your Life. She's appeared all over the place, pretty much every major television, network, radio, podcast, print, all over YouTube. You can learn more at her website, which is dr-ramani.com, and doctor is all spelled out, dr-ramani.com, and her books, of course, are available on Amazon. Dr. Ramani, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lucas. It's a pleasure to be on.
Maybe we could start with a basic definition. You know, the term narcissist is often thrown around just as an insult, in the same way that somebody might call somebody a jerk, or, so maybe you could, from a clinical standpoint, what is a narcissist?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think a narcissist is a medicalized term for a jerk, honestly. But really, when we use the term narcissist, it really means somebody who lacks empathy, is deeply entitled, is grandiose, arrogant, superficial, chronically seeking admiration and validation, doesn't tolerate frustration well, is prone to rage. And at the core of it, they're very deeply insecure. And so thus all the bluster and all of that. So that's really what narcissism is. But the core of it really is that lack of empathy, and everything else kind of, sort of floats around that. But the challenge is a lot of times people think narcissists also, they're confident and they're successful, they're charming, they're charismatic. They're all of those things too. And it's often that because they're so superficial and because they're so insecure, they construct a really good sort of front game, like, a facade, if you will, to hide all that other stuff. And unfortunately, in our culture, as in most cultures, we're very snowed by the superficial external attributes of a person, and we haven't been trained to look deep.
When people think of narcissists, again, people have a stereotype in their head, but when you say lacks empathy, I've talked to other people on the show who would use that to define somebody with psychopath or sociopathic tendencies. How does a narcissist differ? How is that different from somebody with those kind of characteristics?
Psychopathy is a very different kind of a clinical entity, if you will, in the sense of that it's a sort of a deeper, darker, kind of a pattern that's associated, if not with straight out criminality or breaking of laws, it's also of breaking social norms, social codes with absolutely no remorse. So there's no sense of right or wrong. There's no sense of I'm violating someone in a fundamental way, and this is just not right. For a psychopath, they're very much driven by power, pleasure, profit, anything that forwards them. Now, as it's sort of a good, way to think about it. All psychopaths are narcissistic, but not all narcissists are psychopathic. The narcissists are something a bit more. They could be a bit more benign than that. When a narcissist does a bad thing, they'll often feel quite remorseful, especially when they're caught. Whereas even if a psychopath gets caught, they really don't feel genuine remorse. Any remorse they'll do is to get a lighter sentencing or, that
Sure.
kind of thing. But that's really it. It's really, again, ultimately for self-preservation, self in essence. But for a narcissist, there is a lot of shame at that public dressing down. They don't like that. They don't like being judged harshly by the public. Psychopaths don't care.
The stereotype is that men are more narcissistic and that men are more psychopathic. Is there some truth to that?
Yeah.
Is that
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's absolutely a tremendous. Now, but keep in mind, women absolutely can be narcissistic, and it happens all the time. And sadly, like with so much, gender equity is a good thing, except when it comes to this. And we're seeing more and more women who are narcissistic. But it's really a part of it is acculturation, socialization. When men, for example, men are taught to deny their emotions, to not be vulnerable.
Right,
so
right.
that fosters insecurity.
It's a breeding
When you
ground for it,
can't. So yeah, exactly. It's a breeding ground for it. So that sense of I'm going to be superficially tough, I'm going to be rich, and I'm going to be strong, and I'm going to look good, and I'm going to have a fast car, and I'm going to get a hot girl. All of that is sort of the narcissist game, and it's a very masculinized game. And if you really want to go Darwin
Sure.
on this, one would say, well, the guy just wants to spread his seed. I'm like, that's all very great, but we've evolved a little bit beyond that. We do other things like research and write poetry. And so, I think we're beyond that. I just need to be the alpha who, like a baboon or a chimpanzee that needs to spread its seed. It's not that, So I do think, though, that men are very much valued for external indicators of success, like wealth and power and possessions. I think women can be too, but men more so, and men become a means sometimes, sadly, for women to get that. And so those qualities get cultivated in men, and those qualities are inherently narcissistic. So, I think that in essence, when you read the narcissist playbook, it's really a playbook for success. And that's why I think it is sort of slowly upticking and is on the rise.
So before we talk about the success side of things, let's talk about the failure side of things. So many people, failed marriages, failed friendships, failed business partnerships, and people will throw the word narcissist at the wall. I partnered with a narcissist, I married a narcissist, and I always get a little, I don't know, I feel like when people throw these DSM sort of things at people, I'm just not sure. People say things like this all the time to me. I'm bipolar, or I have ADHD, and I guess what I'm asking is, when are these labels helpful, and when is it just an excuse?
I'm going to be frank with you. I don't think they're ever labeled. I don't think they're ever useful, to be frank, because they carry so much surplus meaning. But here's where it gets tricky. Okay, so if I tell you last night I had potatoes, chicken, carrot, celery, salt, broth, noodles for dinner, you're like, oh, great, you had soup. And so, what gets exhausting is the constantly laying it out. But when a person says to me, I was married to someone narcissistic, I'm like, tell me what you mean. And then they'll tell me, and then I'll realize, they're using the word in an interesting way here, or they'll only be, describing part of it, but not another. At the end of the day, to use more, to use, less stigmatized terms, it might be more useful to call these patterns high conflict, difficult, antagonistic. That's what they are, right? And one day, if we kept using high conflict, difficult, and antagonistic long enough, they're going to have that same icky top. No, narcissism, remember, it's not a clinical term. Narcissism, if anything, is a term that comes out of personality psychology. It's a description of a pattern. It's not a diagnosis. So if you call someone narcissistic, it's the equivalent of calling them stubborn. It's just a pattern that you're commenting on. It's not a nice pattern, but it's a pattern. It's like calling someone compassionate. The same question remains, what do you mean by that? So it's just a description. It's not a diagnosis.
The other question that I always have, with something I question about myself, is in we can all become monsters. I mean, in times of war, a regular person turns into a monster in 48 hours. I mean, you can see it just flip on the news. You can see normal humans turning into monsters all the time. I find it hard to believe that these are just the bad people who are expressing these. So where I'm going with this is, can we, in the wrong context, can we become a narcissist? If we go from 0 hours a day on Instagram to 12 hours a day, can we develop this? Can we be in a relationship that somehow brings it out?
I think that what we can do is there's a couple of things. There is that I don't ever call it healthy narcissism, because narcissism in and of itself is an unhealthy pattern interpersonally, right? But I do think that we may err on the side of, for example, people who are really, really fatigued and strung out in their work may not have as much empathy as usual. People with certain patterns of trauma, like post-traumatic stress, may not have as much empathy. People who grew up with so much wealth that their feet never touch the ground may be very entitled, but they may be also capable of empathy. So, I mean, all the little bricks, and that's one of the big bricks of narcissism I meant to get to, is entitlement. It's like that all these bricks are, can we all go there? Sure. I even say there's a phenomenon of infectious narcissism. If you spend enough time around it, it is going to start punctuating yourself, because it becomes a survivalism, right? Everyone is being self-serving. Like you said, at times of war. I put this to my students at Cal State LA. I said, how many of you in this room would kill someone? Of course, no one puts their hand up but me. And I say, I would. If anyone threatened harm to my daughters, even if I had faced consequence, I would kill to protect them. We all have that thing we would do. We would violate all of our moral codes. On an average, like today, would I kill someone? No. And so on any other day, no. And so, yes, will we violate those codes? Will we be less empathic than usual? Think about holiday travel, Lucas. Right now, lots of people are about to get into some really busy airports. Very few people are going to be behaving gracefully, right? Is that because they're bad people? No, it could be that they're fatigued. There's uncertainty. There's they want to get home. There's all these other things happening. So that's why we look for consistency. So in other words, if a person is behaving less than optimally in an airport at Christmas time, or they're not super empathic while they're facing the worst deadlines of their life, I don't know, in school or something, then I'd say, let's wait a beat. Let's wait a beat and see what happens. Then, however, when the deadline passes, or they're not in the airport and they're still behaving badly, and there's a consistency to their pattern, not with lots of people in lots of situations, all of that is consistent, then I'd be like, okay, this is a problem. So I think that, yes, episodically, we are all capable of horrible and wonderful things. That's why psychiatry and psychology are based on patterns and consistency, not one-offs.
So a bunch of people listening are their ears have perked up, because they're thinking, I'm working for a narcissist, I'm in a relationship with a narcissist, and maybe they haven't had a space to have this conversation before. And so I guess where I want to segue into is, how do people start to deal with this on a practical level? I'll just share kind of a personal experience. I had a business partnership with a narcissist probably about 6 years ago. And I'm kind of the opposite of a narcissist. I think I have like Popper's disorder. I just want to be a peasant, And so I just don't play well at their games. And so every time I talked to him, he would name drop. He would tell me about his TED Talks and his celebrity friends and driving on boats, getting drunk with Richard Branson. Just embarrassing stuff. Yes. And I just, he couldn't stand me because I just had no.
That's right.
I just couldn't. I couldn't react. I couldn't even get. I think he even wanted conflict, and I couldn't even get conflict. To me, he was just a ridiculous human being, like just a total ridiculous human being.
Right.
And even when we broke off the business partnership, he tried to have a big fight about it, and I just said, I don't like to work with you. There was no conflict on my end. I just, like I said, I think I have Popper syndrome. I have kind of the opposite of narcissism. And so but I think I'm an exception because I think most people are getting into these and they're struggling back and forth and they don't recognize it and they're doubting themselves and they're feeling insecure and they're not good enough. So walk us through for the person listening who's saying, oh, I totally work for somebody like this, or I'm married to someone like this, or my father-in-law is like this, or how do they start to think about this?
Those are high stakes relationships, right? Marriages, bosses, business partners, and even extended family. So what you got to remember is that it's just not like the sort of stranger on the train kind of thing who's behaving foolishly, like, okay, this train rides an hour, I can last this. Number one is you have to ask yourself, what can you endure? And where's the meaning and purpose and end game in this for you? So a person may, for example, have a really, really awful supervisor. They're in school or they're in a new job, but this job is truly a means to an end and it is time limited. Maybe they can endure it. Here's the thing. The enduring narcissistic abuse does not come without consequence. So if a person's like, no, I can be the Zen master and I'm going to be fine. I'm sorry. Somebody screaming at you and demeaning at you is causing you stress, even if you're not reacting to it. In fact, we're about to start researching this in my lab, which is being simply in the presence of antagonistic interactions, does that actually cause changes in cortisol levels? So even if you're not reacting, even if all you're doing is watching, is it slowly making you sick? I would argue probably yes, at least that's what we're hypothesizing. And so in the long term, this will be unhealthy for you. But some of that unhealthiness, Lucas, comes from when you try to interact with it, when you do try to engage it. It's like no more than you would stick your hand in a lion's enclosure at a zoo. Why? Because the lion's going to bite your arm off. Now you're not going to have an arm. And so why would you do the equivalent with somebody who's narcissistically antagonistic? There's no point in having a conversation. So when you're talking about your friend or the business partner, just sitting there and nodding politely and thinking to yourself, this is ridiculous, and not saying, oh, you're so lucky, I wish I was on that yacht, or, anything like that, and then stepping away and not getting into the mud with them, there's a little sense of self-satisfaction, like I'm not doing this, but over time, it's like eating, I don't know, it's empty calories. It's the fast food of psychology, right? It's not fulfilling. And there's a point at which you have to say, I just wasted an hour. What other good things could I have been doing with that hour? And to step away gracefully from those interactions. So for people who are in these, it's some real heavy soul searching, because while these patterns can shift, but they can't shift usually enough to make a difference to people in relationships with them. And that's where I've actually been under fire. How dare, Dr. Ramani, you say that narcissists can't change? I said, let me say that with a bullet. They can change. They can actually say, I could do this differently. I can say this differently. But those poor narcissistic people are actually exhausting themselves. They actually don't care. They really don't. And it's not because they're bad people, and it's not because you're uninteresting. It's because through a lifetime of wiring and reinforcement and shaping, they just really don't. Maybe they'll get there, but probably not on your watch, because they're already used to not caring about you. And so even if they can muster up some of that, it might still be unsatisfying. Only a person knows what could work for them. Sometimes people say, you know what? I'm staying in the narcissistic marriage. We have 2 or 3 good dinners a week. I get my emotional needs met by a really wonderful circle of friends. I have a good therapist. I have good relationships with my children. I understand. I wish it had been different, but it's not. But I'm not ready to dismantle it. I don't think that's a bad thing. But what I think is a bad thing is when a person wakes up every day and thinks today's going to be different. No, you've got to understand this is how it's going to be. If it's a cold day, you need to put a coat on. You can't say, oh, it's 20 degrees and I bet it's going to be 80 by 4 o'clock. No, it's 20 degrees. It's not going to be 80 by 4 o'clock. Put a coat on. And so I feel like a lot of my work is teaching people to put a coat on. You don't need to be cruel. You don't even need to dismantle your life, but you got to keep it real. You got to keep it real. And with that boss, the boss isn't going to change. The business partner isn't going to change. So you really need to make sure that your financials are in order, and that you think through what, if you keep thinking, well, there's going to be the big breakthrough one day, and when we make it big, I'm going to get mine. No, your business partner is going to take your share and run off into the sunset, and you're going to spend thousands on lawyers trying to get it back. Let's just keep it real. And I think that childlike naivete is what keeps people in these relationships, and they keep getting hurt. If you know what you're dealing with, you can make it happen. But that means getting your head out of a fairy tale and coming back to earth.
So for people who are in, I guess, you said I get my emotional needs met somewhere else, ... For me, that just sounds like a ticking time bomb for, I mean, you're just so vulnerable to stepping out on any kind of relationship if emotional needs are being met somewhere else, don't you think?
Ish. It really depends on what it is, how you're doing. Like, listen, you might be a woman who belongs to a great group of college friends. You know what I'm saying? And your husband is narcissistic. And those college friends are the places you can go to say, I'm really anxious about this with my kid, or I'm anxious about this at work, or I haven't been feeling good about myself. That's not stepping out of a relationship. And people who say, no, marriage should be everything. And I'm like, this person chose badly, because I'll tell you one thing, Lucas, we do not teach people how to choose healthy partners. We teach them how to buy cars. We teach them how to buy houses. We make a big deal about where you go to college. But we do not teach people how to make one of the most important decisions of their lives. So they make them from these absolutely irrational, dysfunctional places. And then we get angry at them, expect them to stay in that bad mess forever. Some people do. I'd like them, if they did make a bad choice, at least to try to salvage what they can in a way that's compassionate to themselves and others. So I can see where you're going with that. And I'll be frank with you, Lucas, I've seen that happen. I've seen people say, you know what, this is a mess. I can't leave it for any number of reasons, this narcissistic relationship. And they would have a liaison that was, maybe not sexual, but they really, really were. They were going someplace else and getting those needs met. But their partner was, after years of couples therapy and fights and arguments, they weren't going to get it met there. I'm not going to judge that. It's not for me, but I'm not going to judge that.
I guess what's hard is, you say we don't know how to pick a partner, but we also don't know how to be a partner. I mean, it's easy to label the narcissist bad, but like maybe I'm not a narcissist, but I got a whole suitcase of problems on my own side.
That's right.
Maybe they don't have as ugly of a name as a narcissist. Maybe they're not as blatant, but I will torment you just as much as a narcissist. So I guess I think that's the inner conflict that people get into as well, is they go, I'm partnered, I'm living with, I'm married, I'm doing business with a narcissist, but you know what? I got my own stuff. So like, who am I to say like that's the line? How do you navigate that in your private practice?
Well, I think number one is that people take ownership for their stuff. They take ownership for the choices that they make. They take ownership for their vulnerabilities. They take ownership for the fact that chaos feels interesting to them because that's how they grew up, but actually it's not healthy. That one day you have to stop living in the service of your history and start making a new reality, like give up the Freud and start taking up the existentialism. Like, you're not a product. It's not that deterministic. It's not that fatalistic. And so I do think, listen, if I had my druthers, instead of giving people watches when they graduate, you give them 6 sessions of therapy and have them start digging a little deep and owning it. Because that's the problem, is people come to therapy once they start having difficulty. And I think that it's really making that. So it's figuring some of that out for yourself. Here's where I struggle. I think because we come from a very rescue-oriented, like a lot of our myths and stories around love are very oriented around rescue. My love will rescue him or her. This, it's all very damsel in distress, these soulmates and all that nonsense, is that it sets people up for what they grew up with, which is they're trying to prove themselves to a parent. So when you get this kind of slightly slippery, emotionally unavailable or even unempathic partner, you're working through all that childhood stuff of, I couldn't win over mom or dad, but God darn it, I'm going to win over this person. And so, and then you're just replaying your 6-year-old birthday party for the rest of your life. And there has to be some understanding of that. But if the problem is, though, we're talking about insecurity, and I always say it's a battle of insecurities. Narcissistic people are pathologically insecure. The rest of us are just plain insecure. And so the problem is, in that battle, pathological insecurity is going to win because it already plays upon a vulnerability we have. It's like after final exams when you get really sick. It's because your immune system's down, and even a small germ makes you really sick. And so that insecurity, we take it in and we doubt ourselves instead of saying, you know what, this doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel respectful. Maybe the most respectful thing for me to do is to step away from this relationship. Most of us don't think we deserve more than that. And so that's another sort of a loop we get caught in. And here's the bottom line. This is a sociological phenomenon. Our entire economy runs on the fact that we're all really insecure. If all of us became secure overnight, who could sell anything? No one would buy night cream or day cream or hair dye or fake, or fake anything. The world counts on us being insecure, because if we were all really secure, we wouldn't need stuff. The entire economy would fall apart. We wouldn't need night creams and day creams and fancy cars. We just need a car that goes from point A to point B. We'd only need like 3 black shirts and a couple of pairs of pants, and we'd be good to go. So I think that this idea that we're always being told we're not enough, you're not thin enough, you're not exercising enough, you're not eating enough kale, you're not raising your children well enough. Also, all we hear, even if we came from healthy, loving, unconditionally loving families, you're throwing people out into shark-infested waters where they're constantly being told they're lacking something. So when that comes up against a narcissistic individual, whether it's business partner or anything, saying you're not enough, they're sort of in on they're in on the whole game. And so that's a wholesale sociological change of everyone's more than enough. You were born into this world more than enough by dint of being a human being. All living creatures are more than enough. And this idea of that's very much though how our world is set up. Some people are less than, some people are worth more. And that worthiness is based on things like celebrity, possessions, wealth, title, social class, and status. Those aren't even important things. I mean, if we really went like big on the most empathic people should be the most successful in our world, our billboards would look very different.
You know, the more than enough thing, I guess on the flip side of that, like, I guess my perspective is that a narcissist isn't enough for me. And so how do you justify that? Because I really feel like there's just not enough. There's not enough.
That's one. I wish everyone felt that. If everyone felt the way you did, I'd actually be out of business, which I'd actually be fine with, to be honest with you. I wish I was out of business. But I think that that's a wonderful way to view that I am worthy of respect. I am worthy of empathy. I'm worthy of positive regard. That's not here. So that's not enough for me. It doesn't mean that individual is not enough. It means that what they're bringing at this point, what they're able to bring at this point in time isn't enough. But Lucas, in a society where we live, where if a person is buying someone expensive gifts and showing them extravagant experiences and taking them out for top shelf dinners, despite treating a person with disrespect or diffidence or distance or coldness or lack of empathy or distraction, people are like, what do you mean that's not enough? Where else is he supposed to take you to dinner? And I'm like, it's not about dinner. You know, and the confusion then becomes many people even come from narcissistic families where their parents took them on vacation and bought them a car and gave them a nice, they gave them stuff, right? Or they cooked meals for them every night, but that not a single emotional need was met in that family of origin. And then they feel guilty because their material needs were met. Like, who am I to say my parents didn't do a good job? They made sure I was fed. Like, but the job of parenting while feeding the safety needs and the day-to-day needs are obviously very important. Those emotional needs are right up there with putting square meals on the table. And we don't talk about it that way. And so I agree with you. They're not enough in terms of what they're bringing. That's just, nobody feels like they deserve that. And so people really feel like, well, this should be enough, or we're very expert in our culture at writing excuses for people. And those excuses, while they can be compassionate in the short term, can be a doom, say, in the long term.
I wanted to chat about Instagram specifically. I don't know why,
Lord.
But this, people have been talking about social media forever, but somehow Instagram has captured the imagination of all age groups, all countries. Everywhere I go, I see people spending just shocking amounts of time on Instagram doing really nothing. It's very similar to like reading, tabloid magazines or People magazine, or here in Europe we have Hola magazine or Hello magazine in the UK. And they're just flipping through these endlessly. And the industry I'm in the yoga industry, so I know a lot of these quote unquote influencers. And it's a really bizarre breed of person. And
yes, it is.
It seems to be kind of a classic narcissist person.
Yes,
and again, I find them just to be complete oddities. I can't engage with them in conversation. They're just bizarre. And to kind of give you a real life example, quite an influential influencer in my world, in the yoga world, she and her husband were going through a divorce, and she revealed this to me before she told her audience. And she says to me, you know what? I did a little test to some of my audience, and so far the response has been great. So I think we're going public with it, and we're going to make it positive. And it was just like this. It was this moment. This was many years ago, and there's just this moment to me where I just realized, like, this is so strange. This is the strangest human being I've ever talked to. What a bizarre, they had kids and everything. I was just like, what a bizarre way to see your life is a 1200 by 1200 pixel photo on a news feed. I'm on social media all the time. I mean, I do it for business and all these things, and my kids are on social media. I don't have anything against it in principle, but there are some really strange things happening on social media. I'm curious, what are your thoughts? Is this a breeding ground for narcissists? Are people becoming more narcissistic? Are they being bred into narcissism?
It's a breeding ground to the level of when it first came out. So, it really started proliferating. I mean, take MySpace out of the whole mess, right? But if you really view it as, it started really kind of getting its teeth in the late 2000s, right? I looked at that and I'm like, oh my God, this narcissism game is about to change. Because it used to be that the only way a person could get admiration and validation was by actually talking to people, right? You'd actually have to go and find other living, breathing people, because on the phone it's only one-on-one. So how are you even going to find these vast audiences of people to chronically give you validation? People are like, why is this changing so fast? Is because basically this was the injection drug. This was a way to get mass amounts of validation to the people who needed it quickly. And, listen, I see far more bad than good to social media. There's no two ways about it. Do I see some good? Absolutely. I think there are communities of people out there who once were completely unheard, particularly in the mental health community. People with mental health patterns where they felt no one understood what they were going through. I see people like, for example, parents of special needs kids who really go, who find communities in there, get help. I do see that there's people from around the world are getting information. I trust me when I see the virtues. I think they're very, very big. The problem is that the virtue is kind of now entangled with this really toxic space, because most people on social media are either seeking admiration and validation, or they're comparing themselves to other people. It's very difficult to see that your best friend's yoga pose is better than yours, or they're getting more people in their yoga studio, or their house is better, or their kids are cuter, or their Christmas card is better decorated, or Christmas tree is better decorated. It just feeds that sense of I am not enough, because a lot of what's on social media is a manufactured life, right? It's like a stage set into which a person takes all the papers out and puts perfect furniture in. And they're like, wow, what a clean house. I'm like, nobody lives there. That's why it's a clean house. Right. And that's what social media is. It's the house that nobody lives in, and it always looks good. And so, and what's happening is that people who are so-called influencers, they're turning their life into a brand. They're self-commodifying. That's an exoskeleton. And psyches are meant to be endoskeletons. They're meant to be from the inside out. But when everyone's sense of self-esteem is being regulated from the outside in, and there's no other attempts meant to do deep inner work. Listen, if people were balancing this off with doing the deeper dives, actually having one-on-one relationships with people, building a sense of community, finding meaning and purpose in their life, and that was sort of the offset, I'll be like, then it's kind of harmless fun. To me, Instagram is the equivalent of flipping through that tabloid magazine, but the people populating the pages are your friends instead of being like a movie star. And that's all it is. It's like and we look at those movie star magazines because we wonder, what would it be like to have their life, or what are they wearing? What would that look like on me? It's all about social comparison. The difference is that the target now is your friend. So I don't look at Angelina Jolie and wonder why I don't look like that. I don't, and I won't. But if it's my friend who looks like $1 million, I might say, oh God, why don't I look like that? Yeah. And I will become I will demean myself and saying, well, she looks like that. She's got 2 kids. Why don't I look like that? And so, and in the wrong hands, in the hands of people who are more vulnerable, and especially in developing brains like adolescents, it's really skewing the normal. And I have to tell you, since this is all a recent development, I don't know how it's going to land. I have children, I have teenage daughters, and they say to me, Mom, at some level, we're almost using social media like you use a phone. Like we communicate with each other about it. And she's like, I don't look at that and wonder. And I've got to say, I've been heartened to see that while they do sometimes get a little worried, like this one looks good, that one looks good, they're also able to happily say, hey, Mom, did you see such and such is on vacation and such, without much rancor in their voice? But maybe I can take a little credit for that as their mother, sort of saying, can we talk about these things? So I think this is the first time where the kids understand something far better than the parents do. So the parents can't even parent in this space. So in the macro, I don't think it's a good thing in terms of narcissism and closeness, intimacy, meaning and purpose, that sort of thing.
A couple of kids. I have a 14-year-old daughter, and same thing. You know, I've never had a television in the house, and kind of proud of that. And then I realized, like, my daughter's got a phone. She's had a phone for a couple of years, and I realized, like, maybe I should just get a TV and get rid of the phone.
I think social media is worse than TV.
It's way
because
worse,
at least the TV show's fake. Like, we watch it and we're like, these are people in a silly drama. And so that's not my life. But reality TV is the Instagram of television, right? Because those if you audition for the reality show, that could be you. And I mean, we can see where our world got on the backs of reality TV now. No good came of that. So it's that's the struggle, is that it is just, again, constant admiration and validation seeking, constant social comparison, and all of that. Forget the epidemic of narcissism. My bigger concern is the epidemic of insecurity.
What you said is that we don't know how to parent. I would completely agree with social media. I completely agree with that, because, I just think of how cruel we were when I was young. We didn't have these tools of of mass communication. I just can't imagine, my daughter and her friends, they all have their public profile, but then they all have secret profiles. This is the thing. They all have their secret, if we're close, because they don't want they don't want their parents to see it. Maybe they DM inappropriate stuff or whatever. And I don't even know how to think about this, but I'm sitting there, this morning, my daughter's eating breakfast. She's got her phone in her hand. I'm trying to have a conversation with her, and I'm proud of myself for not having a TV. And I'm just thinking, I have not a clue. I don't even know where to begin with this, but I know that thing is feeding her brain garbage.
It is. It is feeding her brain, and we don't know what's about to happen. I do have to say, though, we are seeing a sense of poorer frustration tolerance, a sort of ennui, and an existential kind of a depression, because what can measure up to your friends' holiday photographs from the Maldives, and this one going to Hawaii, and this one in her new bikini, and this one with her new haircut? Regular life of getting up and kind of going to an ordinary job all day, how does it compare? And that's the problem. That's where it's almost like the whole, post-addiction landscape, right? Talk to someone who's a drug addict, they'll say, it's tough to find something that made me as high as Coke. And that's a fact, because your brain won't respond the same way. And Instagram and all these platforms are set up to be addictive. So you keep going and going and going. There's no stop built into them. I wish there was a way after 15 minutes, the system shuts down and says, you can't do this for an hour. But I don't think I'm going to get the Instagram bosses on board with that. So you have to be your own boss. And our frontal lobe, it's never going to cooperate with that. It's going to say, I want to have fun. So no.
I really love the work that you're doing. You have a really unique voice and unique perspective. I'm excited to dig into your books. I know a lot of our listeners will want to check out your work. Tell people where they can go to connect with you online and to pick up your books and follow you.
Absolutely. Well, you can find me on my website, Dr. Ramani, DoctorRamani.com. I also have a podcast called Sexual Disorientation. And if you have more specific questions, you're also welcome to email us at sexualdisorientation@gmail.com, where we take on lots of issues around love, relationships, a lot around narcissism. Although I have an Instagram profile, far smarter people than me help me run that. And that's also at DoctorRamani, and on Facebook and on Twitter at that same handle. And that, next year, I have a new book coming out next year that takes on exactly some of the stuff we're talking about, the bigger sociological issues around narcissism and why this is a bigger monster than we think, and how to navigate it. And then, and then I'm trying to do more and more sort of regional speaking engagements. So as those come up, if you follow us on social media, you'll see where those are coming up. So yeah, that's me.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, and perhaps we can have you back in the future to talk about food, maybe sexuality at some point as well. Really appreciate what you're doing. Back in 2005 and 2006, I was running and eventually owning a yoga studio, and we had a big problem. We needed to staff up. We needed to hire more teachers, and we just couldn't find qualified applicants. Literally, we would put out a job ad, we'd interview a bunch of people, and most quote-unquote certified teachers just couldn't teach a good class. So we started in-house trainings. In fact, my first 2 courses, there was no paying people at all. We actually sponsored people to take the course, and we hired them, and they became teachers, many of whom are still teachers today, all these years later. And in 2006, we opened up our first course to the public and started training professional teachers, and we used this same approach. The idea was we want people job ready by the end of the course so that we can hire them, or that somebody can hire them. And interestingly enough, this was one of the only courses in the world that was actually training professional teachers. Most yoga courses, you sing some songs, you eat some lentils, and you get a certificate. At our course, you actually learn professional skills, public speaking, applied anatomy, nutrition, physiology, all of the skills that local yoga students are looking for. That's why our graduates are among the highest paid, most employed, most successful teachers in the world. This year we have our 4,000th graduate completing our programs, and it's one of the things that brings me the most joy in all the work that I do. We have a bunch of programs I'd encourage you to check out if you're thinking about becoming a yoga teacher in 2019, and all of them can be found at yogateacherscollege.com, yogateacherscollege.com/calendar to see all of our upcoming events. We have courses as short as 1 week and as long as 6 months, and we even have online training programs for those of you who can't travel to train with us. Hope that's helpful, and I look forward to talking with you more and hopefully training with you sometime in the future here in the upcoming year. This week's nutritional tip is in response to a listener question about potatoes. And the listener says, hey, why are all these paleo and healthy people eating sweet potatoes? What's the deal? Are they really better? So if we look at a sweet potato versus a white potato, if we look at white table sugar versus like a raw cane sugar, if we look at white rice versus whole grain rice, they're more similar than they are different, if we're being totally honest. There isn't that much difference. What you will find is more fiber and more nutritional density, specifically micronutrients. So different phytonutrients, things like vitamins and minerals and things like this, and enzymes, of course. In the case of potatoes, if you go from a white potato, they tend to have it tends to be a really highly pesticide-laden food, a white potato, a very commercial potato. And if you get to the more rustic stuff, the ugly, bumpy, colorful ones in particular, if you get into a sweet potato, for example, or a yam, you'll get much, much higher levels of beta-carotene, which is a precursor for vitamin A. Hopefully it turns into vitamin A in your body. You get vitamin C, you get some fiber, and you get some other interesting compounds that are thought to be really helpful for your blood sugar, your blood glucose levels. Now, of course, it is still a very starchy food. Another really interesting thing that people don't talk enough about is when you go from these highly refined white foods to their uglier, bumpier, more colorful classmates, people often eat them in moderation. So as an example, a baguette of white bread, you can eat the entire thing. A whole grain bread will usually slow you down. Same with white rice, you can overeat that very quickly, whereas a whole grain or a more fibrous rice will slow you down. A white potato, people eat massive plate of mashed potatoes, but oddly with sweet potatoes or yams, people love them, and yet somehow they get slowed down by the nutritional density. So that's another benefit to them, but definitely lower pesticide levels, higher level of micronutrients, higher levels of fiber, and just straight up objectively, they taste better. Now, most people in developed countries have lost their taste buds for real food. So if you look at the most popular foods, things like corn and white rice and milk and chicken and white sugar, they're really pretty flavorless. If you look at their more natural counterparts, there's way more flavor in these foods, but a lot of our palates have become really unsophisticated. But if you train your palate again, you'll really start to enjoy these flavors. Objectively, anything that's not a white potato has more flavor and is more interesting from a taste bud perspective and a culinary perspective, but it takes a little while to get back into it. So if you're choosing between sweet potatoes and white potatoes, for sure go for sweet potatoes. Little fun fact a lot of people don't realize, if you cook a sweet potato, if you bake it, for example, it has an incredibly long shelf life in the refrigerator. So if you refrigerate it, it'll literally last up to a week. So I will often cook 3 sweet potatoes like on a weekend, throw them in the refrigerator, and then I have sort of a safe starch to add to meals during the week, and they will last all week long. Hope that's helpful. We have a question this week from listener Christine. Christine starts off saying, Lucas, I'm a busy mom, 4-year-old twins, full-time career, taking a yoga teacher training course at the moment, and so not much spare time. As you can imagine, I have a fondness for people and resources that cut through the nonsense and get to the point, which is why I love your shows. Well, thanks for listening, Christine. She goes on to say, I'm looking for new workout methods and came across these videos and blog posts on the long breath diet and wanted to get your take on this, fact or fiction. I value your opinion on these kinds of things. So a couple of things to think about. One thing that's really interesting is when you lose weight, the question is, where does the weight go? Let's imagine you lose, let's imagine you lose 4 kilos, 10 pounds, something like that. where does that weight go? Let's say that weight's all on your belly or all on your hips or something like that. Where does it go? Well, of course, some of it you defecate and urinate out, but the vast majority does actually come out through your breath. It's actually through CO2. That's where it goes technically. That said, breathing a whole bunch isn't going to make you lose weight. Now, if you do some of these breathing exercises, this particular, quote unquote, breath guru is teaching, long, sort of restrictive breath and things like this. Sometimes by doing that, you might relieve stress, you might increase your body awareness, and you might have some anecdotal associative results. This can happen from anything. A lot of times people will start doing a meditation practice and they'll lose weight. A lot of times people will start just finding a little bit more stress balance in their life and lose weight. But if you have some serious weight to lose and you're trying to find something sustainable, just doing breath work is probably not the best approach. If you're looking at body composition, about 80% is diet, 20% is movement. And so diet meaning, your body's made in the kitchen and your muscles are made in the gym and the yoga studio. And 80% of that is going to be from what you put in your mouth. So if you're looking for the highest leverage thing, it's not going to be meditation or incantations or affirmations or breathing. Although, to be honest, those things sometimes can put you in the right direction, but the biggest change is going to happen in the kitchen. And then a smaller but very important change will also happen: movement. 80% diet, body composition, 20% movement. Gym, yoga, cycling, whatever you're up to. So I hope that's helpful. I always like when I hear people teaching breathing and advocating for breathing. Unfortunately, there's a lot of hyperbole in the breathing community right now. Wim Hof telling you it's going to cure cancer, and people, saying you breathe a lot and you'll lose weight. It's unfortunate because breath is quickly gaining popularity, and I'm afraid it's going to be a fad that just disappears because of this exaggerated benefits. Lots of great things you can do with breath, probably not the best path to weight loss. Hope that's helpful.
This week's iTunes review is by V Unit 12 from the US. V Unit 12 says, I don't necessarily listen to podcasts, but for some divine reason I was led to this one. I cannot begin to explain how much it helps me grow and how much I enjoy listening. This podcast provides a smorgasbord of brain food and a fresh, radical perspective on topics that should matter to everyone. If you're about self-improvement, health is wealth life, I highly recommend it. Thank you, V Unit 12. You have won the Yoga Trapeze. Email us at podcast@yogabody.com and we will ship it to you.
Breathing is one of the fastest and most powerful ways you can affect your nervous system, the pH of your blood, even your endocrine system. It's really dramatic how quickly you can impact your body, but most people don't understand it. If you go to yoga classes, the teacher just says, breathe deeply, breathe slowly. And we don't really understand what that means. I got really frustrated with this, so I put together a guide for you, my podcast listeners. Go to yogabody.com/how to breathe. Yogabody.com/how to breathe. You put in your email, and I'll give you this PDF. It shows you exactly how to do water, whiskey, and coffee breathing. These 3 specific practices, which all breathing falls into one of these 3 categories. Check it out. Let me know what you think. Yogabody.com/how to breathe.